The crystal chandeliers scattered light like frozen tears across the mahogany walls of the Meridian Suite. 40 floors above Manhattan, the private dining room of the Aurelius Hotel existed in a realm where oxygen itself seemed refined, where even silence cost $1,000 an hour. Elena Vasquez moved between the tables with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that the wealthy preferred their staff to be ghosts. 26 years old, master's degree in art history from Columbia, summa cum laude, fluent in Spanish, Italian, French, and Portuguese, specialized knowledge in Renaissance forgery, detection and provenance authentication, currently earning $11 an hour plus tips, carrying Dover sole and champagne flutes to men whose watches cost more than her student loan debt. She paused at the service station, adjusting the white cloth napkin draped over her forearm. In the polished brass of the water pitcher, she caught her reflection, dark hair pulled back severely, minimal makeup, the standard issue black uniform that rendered her interchangeable with every other server in the BU building, the uniform of disappearance. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't need to look. The collection agency had called 6 times today. Her mother's medical bills had metastasized like the cancer they were treating, $287,000 and climbing. The house in Queens, the one her father had paid off 2 months before his heart attack, now carried a second mortgage she couldn't afford. Some nights, Elena lay awake calculating trajectories. At her current salary, accounting for rent, food, minimum payments on her student loans, and the pittance she could scrape together for her mother's medications, she would be debt-free in approximately 47 years. She would be 73, assuming nothing else went wrong, assuming the interest rates didn't climb, assuming she never got sick herself. Elena had applied to 43 museum positions in the past 18 months. 2 interviews, 0 callbacks. The first interview, at a small gallery in Chelsea, had ended when the director realized Elena knew more about the Dutch Golden Age collection than she did. The second, at a prestigious auction house, had gone beautifully until the HR representative discovered Elena's current employment. "A waitress," the woman had said, her smile curdling at the edges. "How interesting. We'll be in touch." They never were. "Overqualified," they said, which meant, "We'd rather hire someone whose desperation is less obvious." Tonight's event was different from the usual corporate dinners and anniversary celebrations. The hotel's general manager, a nervous man named Patterson, who smelled perpetually of stress sweat and expensive cologne, had pulled the entire service staff aside 2 hours ago. "This is a private acquisition meeting," Patterson had whispered, as though the walls themselves might be recording. "Marcus Sterling, Meridian Capital Partners, and representatives from the Corsini estate in Florence. There will be significant items discussed. You see nothing. You hear nothing. You exist only to pour wine and clear plates. Am I understood?" Elena had nodded along with the others, but her heart had stuttered at 2 words. Corsini estate, the Corsini family. Florentine nobility since the 13th century. One of the most significant private art collections in Europe, amassed over 700 years of strategic marriages, papal connections, and what polite historians called aggressive acquisition. Her thesis advisor at Columbia, Dr. Marchetti, had spent 3 years trying to gain access to their archives, and now Elena was going to serve them breadsticks. She lifted the first tray of amuse-bouches, seared foie gras with fig reduction, and pushed through the swinging door into the dining room. Her eyes, trained by 5 years of academic study, immediately cataloged the space, a single painting on the far wall, old master style, depicting a Madonna and child. Florentine school, late 15th century, based on the composition. Her pulse quickened, but it wasn't the painting that made her breath catch. It was the wooden crate in the corner, partially opened, revealing layers of archival tissue and climate-controlled packaging, the kind of container used to transport museum-quality works across international borders. Something significant was about to change hands tonight. Something that had traveled from Florence to Manhattan in the belly of a climate-controlled cargo hold, wrapped in more protective material than most people wrapped their children. Elena set down the first plate in front of an empty chair, her movements automatic, her mind racing. And somewhere in the distance, she heard the elevator chime. The powerful were arriving. Marcus Sterling entered like weather, atmospheric, inevitable, changing the pressure in the room simply by existing within it. 62 years old, silver hair cropped close, bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Elena's annual salary. He moved with the particular grace of men who had never, not once in their lives, worried about being denied entry to anywhere. His watch caught the light. "A Patek Philippe," Elena noted automatically. The kind of timepiece that cost more than the house she'd grown up in. The kind of object that existed less as a way to tell time and more as a message. I have already won whatever game you think you're playing. Behind him came his entourage. A rail-thin woman in her 40s with the pinched expression of someone who calculated human worth in decimal points, introduced as Victoria Chen, Chief Investment Officer. A younger man barely out of his 30s, all nervous energy and designer glasses, Gregory Walsh, Senior Acquisitions Analyst. And finally, the legal muscle, a partner from Whitmore and Associates whose name Elena didn't catch but whose $2,000 briefcase spoke volumes. Sterling surveyed. The room the way generals survey battlefields, assessing, calculating, already certain of victory. "Where are the Italians?" he asked no one in particular. Victoria checked her phone. 5 minutes out. Their authenticator insisted on accompanying the piece from JFK personally. Authenticator? Sterling's mouth curved into something that wanted to be a smile but couldn't quite commit. As if a Botticelli needs authentication. Elena, filling water glasses in the corner, felt her hands tremble. Botticelli. They were discussing a Botticelli, one of perhaps 60 authenticated works by the master, still in private hands, each one worth, she did the mental math, somewhere between $40 and $150 million, depending on subject matter, provenance, and condition. She forced herself to breathe, to remain invisible. The elevator chimed again. Count Alessandro Corsini was exactly what centuries of European aristocracy had designed him to be. Tall, angular, with the carved features of a Michelangelo marble, and the bored eyes of someone who had inherited more beauty than any human could reasonably appreciate. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed in Italian linen despite the February cold, he walked into the room as though conferring a favor upon it. Beside him, a smaller figure, Dr. Matteo Ricci, according to the place cards Elena had set an hour ago. The authenticator. Academic type, early 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time with manuscripts than mirrors. Elena positioned herself against the wall, water pitcher in hand, watching the choreography of wealth meeting wealth. The handshakes, firm but brief, no warmth required. The assessment of watches and cufflinks, mutual. The settling into chairs with the comfort of men who had never not had chairs offered to them. "The Madonna della Luce," Count Corsini began, his English accented but flawless, "has been in my family's collection since 1487, when my ancestor purchased it directly from Sandro Botticelli's workshop. There is documentation, there is provenance, there is no question." Sterling nodded, but his eyes were on the crate. "And yet, you're selling." A flicker of something crossed Corsini's face. There and gone, a fish breaking water. "My family's affairs are not your concern, Mr. Sterling. Only the painting, only the price." 85 million. Sterling said the number like it was a weather report. "That was your asking price. I'm prepared to offer 70. Dr. Ricci leaned forward. "Perhaps we should examine the painting first, before we discuss figures. You may find that the Madonna della Luce is worth considerably more than any number previously discussed." Two of Sterling's staff rose to help Dr. Ricci with the crate. The tissue paper rustled like whispers as the layers were peeled away. And then, finally, the painting emerged. Elena couldn't help herself. She moved 3 steps closer, still clutching her. A water pitcher, her academic training overriding 5 years of service industry invisibility. The Madonna della Luce was 26 inches by 19 inches, tempera and oil on panel, depicting the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child, while a mysterious light seemed to emanate from behind them, hence the name. The colors were extraordinary, the Virgin's robe a deep ultramarine that only true lapis lazuli could produce, the gold leaf halo still luminous after 500 years. Elena knew from her research that genuine lapis lazuli pigment in the 15th century had been worth more than gold by weight. It was imported from Afghanistan, ground by hand, suspended in oil, a process so expensive that only the wealthiest patrons could afford it. The blue in this painting was perfect, too perfect perhaps. It was beautiful, it was perfect, it was wrong. Elena's breath stopped in her throat. Her eyes, trained through countless hours in the Met's conservation department, through her thesis research on Quattrocento forgeries, through Dr. Marchetti's brutal seminars on authentication methodology, those eyes saw what no one else in the room could see. Gregory Walsh, the young analyst, was gushing. "Remarkable. The brushwork is extraordinary. You can see the sfumato technique that Botticelli developed in his later period." "Mr. Walsh," Sterling interrupted without looking at him, Please stop demonstrating the limits of your art history minor. Walsh's face reddened. He stepped back. Sterling turned to Dr. Ricci. I assume you have documentation, infrared imaging, dendrochronology reports. Everything is in order, Ricci said smoothly, sliding a leather portfolio across the table. The panel dates to between 1480 and 1495. The pigment analysis confirms materials consistent with Florentine workshops of the period. The provenance chain is unbroken from 1487 to the present day. Sterling nodded, satisfied, and Elena, standing against the wall with her water pitcher, felt the weight of $85 million of fraud pressing against her chest. She knew what she had seen. She knew what no one else could see. The question was, what would she do about it? Elena's hands shook as she set down the water pitcher in the service alcove. Through the crack in the door, she could hear Sterling's team discussing numbers, their voices casual with the obscenity of the figures they threw around. 75 million, 78, a counteroffer of 82, but all she could see was the Virgin's left hand. It had taken her 3 years of graduate study to understand what she'd just witnessed. 3 years of staring at high-resolution scans of Botticelli's authenticated works, memorizing the way he rendered fingers, slightly elongated, the knuckles softened almost to the point of bonelessness, the particular curve he gave to the Virgin's little finger in every single Madonna painting. The Madonna della Luce had the wrong hands. Not wrong in any way that a casual observer, or even most art historians, would notice. The technical execution was extraordinary. The forger had studied Botticelli's technique obsessively, but they had missed one thing. Botticelli had a peculiar way of positioning the Virgin's left thumb. In every authenticated Madonna, without exception, the thumb curved inward at a specific angle, creating what art historians called the Botticelli gesture. It was a signature as distinctive as a fingerprint. The painting in the next room showed the thumb curving outward. Elena pressed her back against the wall, trying to think. The dendrochronology could be genuine. Forgers often used period-appropriate panels, sometimes cutting them from the backs of lesser works. The pigment analysis could pass inspection if the forger had access to historical materials. But the hand was a confession written in oil and tempera. She should walk away. She knew this. Her job, her $11 an hour lifeline to keeping her mother's house, depended on her remaining invisible, on seeing nothing, hearing nothing. But $85 million. $85 million about to change hands for a painting that Sandro Botticelli had never touched. Elena slipped back into the dining room under the pretense of refilling water glasses. No one looked at her. She was furniture. She was air. She moved closer to the painting, her eyes scanning for confirmation of what she already knew. And she found it. Layer upon layer of wrongness that built into a damning case. The craquelure pattern, the network of fine cracks that develops in old paintings, was too uniform. Natural aging produced irregular patterns. Artificial aging, no matter how skillfully applied, created cracks that were slightly too regular, too evenly distributed. This painting's surface showed the telltale geometry of forced deterioration. And there, in the lower right corner, almost invisible to the naked eye, a tiny inscription in the gold leaf of the frame's inner edge. Elena had to suppress a gasp when she recognized the lettering style. She had written her thesis on Icilio Federico Gioni, the greatest art forger of the 19th century. The man had been so skilled that his work still hung in major museums, their true origins discovered only through advances in scientific analysis decades after his death. And he had a signature, not a literal one, but a distinctive way of rendering text that appeared in the frames of many of his works. The inscription on the Madonna della Luce's frame matched Gioni's style exactly. This wasn't just a forgery, it was a Gioni, one of the master forger's own works, probably created in the 1890s and sold to the Corsini family as a genuine Botticelli. The family had believed it authentic for over a century. Or, Elena's eyes moved to Dr. Ricci, the authenticator, the man who had accompanied the painting from Florence, who had prepared the documentation, who had vouched for its provenance. Dr. Ricci was watching Marcus Sterling with the particular intensity of a predator waiting for its prey to step into a trap. He knew. Of course he knew. A man with his credentials could not possibly have missed what Elena had seen. The forger's tells were obvious to anyone with the right training, which meant this wasn't an innocent sale of a painting the Corsini family believed to be genuine. This was fraud, deliberate, calculated, $85 million fraud. And Elena was the only person in the room who could see it. She retreated to the service station, her mind racing. What were her options? She could say nothing, let the sale proceed, keep her job, pay her mother's medical bills for another month before the next crisis. She could approach Sterling privately after the meeting, risk being dismissed as a jealous waitress trying to sabotage a deal above her station. She thought of her father, Miguel Vasquez, amateur painter, lover of art, the man who had taken 6-year-old Elena to the Met every Saturday morning because he believed beauty was a kind of food that the soul needed to survive. He had taught her to look, really look, at the way light fell across a painted face. He had shown her how to spot the difference between craftsmanship and genius. Truth doesn't need permission, he used to say, his accent thickening the way it always did when he spoke about things that mattered. Truth only needs courage. He had died believing his daughter would change the art world. He had died before the rejection letters started arriving. Or she could do the thing that every professor at Columbia had trained her to do. She could tell the truth. Through the door, she heard Sterling's voice. 83 million, final offer. And Count Corsini's reply, smooth as aged wine. Accepted. Shall we proceed to documentation? Elena's hand was on the door before she realized she had moved. Some decisions are not made. They make themselves. And sometimes the only way to become visible is to step into the light and refuse to be ignored. Stop. The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. Every head turned toward the service door, toward the waitress who had somehow forgotten her place. Elena stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. You cannot sign those documents. The painting is a forgery. For 3 heartbeats, absolute silence. Then Marcus Sterling laughed, a short, sharp sound that contained zero warmth. I'm sorry, did our waitress just interrupt an $83 million transaction? Victoria Chen was already moving toward the door, presumably to call security. Gregory Walsh looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. But Dr. Ricci's face had gone the color of old parchment. This is absurd, Count Corsini said, rising from his chair. I will not have my family's property insulted by the help. Then let's test it, Elena said, and her voice was steady now, her years of academic training taking over. She moved toward the painting with the confidence of someone who had spent 1,000 hours in conservation labs. If I'm wrong, I'll lose my job, and you can have me arrested for disrupting your evening. But if I'm right, you're about to pay $83 million for a painting created by Icilio Federico Gioni sometime between 1890 and 1915. Sterling held up a hand to stop Victoria, his eyes, cold, assessing, fixed on Elena with new interest. Who are you? No one important, Elena said. But I wrote my thesis on Gioni's forgery techniques at Columbia, and I'm telling you that painting carries his signature. She's lying, Dr. Ricci said quickly, too quickly. The painting has been authenticated by 3 independent laboratories. The provenance is documented back to 1487. This is nothing more than explain the hands. Elena turned to face him directly, and something in her expression made him step back. Botticelli painted the Virgin's left thumb curving inward at a 17-degree angle in every single authenticated Madonna. It's called the Botticelli gesture. Every major Botticelli scholar knows this. You know this, Dr. Ricci. She pointed at the painting. That thumb curves outward at approximately 12 degrees. It's wrong. It's beautiful, but it's wrong. Sterling's eyes moved to the painting, back to Elena, back to Dr. Ricci, whose face had begun to perspire despite the room's careful climate control. Continue, Sterling said quietly. Elena moved closer to the painting, her confidence building with each word. The craquelure is too uniform. Natural aging produces irregular crack patterns because wood expands and contracts differently along its grain. This craquelure is almost geometrically consistent, the result of artificial aging, probably through controlled temperature fluctuations. She pointed to the corner of the frame. And here, this inscription in the gold leaf, it's in Gioni's distinctive hand. He couldn't resist signing his work, even when he was committing fraud. It was his one vanity. She traced the lettering with her finger, not quite touching the frame. See the way the serifs curve? The particular thickness of the downstrokes? I've seen this hand on 7 other confirmed Gioni forgeries. It's as distinctive as a fingerprint. This is outrageous, Count Corsini sputtered. My family has owned this painting for 500 years. There are records, documents. Your family believed they owned a Botticelli for 500 years, Elena said, and there was something almost like sympathy in her voice. But the truth is, Count Corsini, your ancestor was swindled sometime in the 1890s. Probably by Gioni himself. The original painting, if there ever was one, was likely sold to another collector. And your family received this masterful copy. She turned back to Dr. Ricci. Or perhaps you already knew that, Dr. Ricci. Perhaps that's why your authentication conveniently omits any mention of the thumb angle, or the crack lure pattern, or the frame inscription. Ricci's mouth opened and closed. His hand moved involuntarily toward his briefcase, toward the documentation that now damned him. The tests were conducted by independent laboratories. I merely compiled the results. If there are discrepancies, il pollis, Elena said softly, switching to Italian. Lei sapiva del pollis. The thumb. You knew? You knew about the thumb. Ricci's face crumbled. The Italian, perfect, fluent, with a Florentine accent that placed her as someone who had studied in Italy, not just about it, had stripped away his last defense. The painting is worth nothing, Elena said, switching back to English for the benefit of Sterling and his team. As a Botticelli anyway. As a Joni, it might fetch $200,000 or $300,000 at auction, assuming anyone wants a painting with such a complicated provenance. Marcus Sterling rose slowly from his chair. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Victoria, he said quietly, please call our legal team and the FBI's art crime division. Count Corsini had gone gray. I had no knowledge of this, Ricci assured me. Then you have nothing to worry about, Sterling said, his tone making clear he believed otherwise. Dr. Ricci, I suggest you don't leave the building. The lawyer was already on the phone. Gregory Walsh was staring at Elena as though she had grown a second head. And Dr. Ricci, the great authenticator, the man who had built his career on legitimizing fraud, sat down heavily in his chair, his hands trembling. How long? Sterling asked Elena, his voice soft but carrying the weight of mountains. How long have you known? Since I saw the painting, Elena said. About 45 minutes. Sterling stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. A real laugh this time, with something almost like admiration in it. You just saved me $83 million with a 45-minute glance, he said. And you've been pouring my water all evening. Elena met his eyes. Someone has to. The FBI had arrived with the quiet efficiency of people who investigated art crime for a living. 2 agents in suits that were nice but not too nice, with the particular patience of bureaucrats who knew that $83 million frauds generated paperwork measured in cubic feet. Dr. Matteo Ricci was escorted from the Meridian Suite in handcuffs, his face a study in collapsed dignity. The cameras waiting in the lobby, somehow someone had tipped off the press, captured every step of his walk of shame. Count Alessandro Corsini fared only slightly better. He was not arrested, but the agents made clear that the investigation would be thorough, that questions would be asked about how an authenticated Joni had remained in his family's collection for a century, and that the cooperation of Italian authorities had already been requested. His ancient family name, 700 years in the building, had cracked in a single evening. The New York Times would run the story in 3 days. The Wall Street Journal would follow. Art World blogs would dissect every detail, every moment of the evening when a billionaire had almost been swindled by a European count and his corrupt authenticator. Dr. Ricci's name would become synonymous with fraud, joining the pantheon of art world villains alongside Han van Meegeren and Wolfgang Beltracchi. None of them would mention the waitress, at least not yet. Elena watched from the service station as the last of the investigators cleared the room. Her hands had stopped shaking somewhere around the 3rd hour of questioning when it became clear that the FBI viewed her not as a suspect, but as a miracle. A random waitress who had happened to possess exactly the right expertise at exactly the right moment. Random, she thought, as if her entire life hadn't been building toward this. Patterson, the hotel's general manager, had appeared somewhere during the chaos, his face cycling through expressions of horror, confusion, and, when he realized the hotel was not going to be blamed, overwhelming relief. You should have said something to me first, he muttered to Elena as he passed. Protocol, chain of command. But he didn't fire her. He didn't dare. Not with Marcus Sterling still in the building, asking questions about her. The fraudster was gone. The fraud was exposed, and the invisible woman had finally been seen. The room had emptied. The painting, the beautiful, fraudulent Madonna della Luce, had been packaged and taken into evidence. The champagne sat untouched on the sideboard, bubbles long since died. Only Marcus Sterling remained, sitting in the chair at the head of the table as though he owned it, which, Elena reflected, he probably could if he wanted to. Sit down, he said. Not a request. Elena hesitated, then took the chair across from him. The The same chair Count Corsini had occupied hours ago, back when the evening's trajectory seemed certain. "Who are you?" Sterling asked again, but differently this time. Not dismissive, curious. "Elena Vasquez, Columbia University, class of 2022. Master's in art history with a specialization in Renaissance authentication. And you're a waitress." "I'm a lot of things." Elena's voice held no bitterness, only the weariness of someone who had explained this before. "I'm also in debt, a lot of debt. My mother is sick, and the healthcare system in this country is not designed for families like mine. I applied to 43 museum positions. They all wanted experience I couldn't get, because no one would hire me without it." She paused. "So yes, I pour water for men who own more than I'll ever earn. I smile and I disappear and I pretend I don't. Notice when they talk about numbers that would change my entire life, like they're discussing the weather." Sterling was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge. "My father was a steelworker, Pittsburgh, 1965. He never owned anything worth more than his pickup truck." He looked at her directly. "I know what invisible looks like, Miss Vasquez. I just forgot." Elena didn't know what to say to that. The man who had seemed like a monument of wealth and power was suddenly, unexpectedly, human. "Tell me about Joni," he said. "Tell me how you knew." So she did. She told him about Dr. Marchetti and the seminars on Quattrocento forgery, about the hundreds of hours spent comparing brushstrokes and pigment composition, about her thesis defense and the examiners who had called her work exceptional and groundbreaking and then failed to offer her a single job. She told him about the nights in the Columbia Library surviving on vending machine coffee and the fierce certainty that what she was learning mattered, about the fellowship that had paid for her master's degree, funded by an anonymous donor who believed in investing in first-generation college students, about the promise she had made herself on the day she graduated summa cum laude that she would find a way to pay it forward. She told him about her father, the amateur painter who had first shown her how to see the difference between a copy and an original, about her mother who had worked double shifts as a nurse so Elena could attend Columbia, about the debt that had swallowed their lives like rising water. "My mother is in stage 3, Elena said, and it was the first time she had spoken the words aloud to anyone outside her family. "The treatments are working, but the bills never stop. I calculated it once. If I paid the minimum on everything, lived on nothing, gave every spare cent to the hospital, I would be free of debt when I was 73. She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. 73. And that assumes I never buy anything, never get sick, never have a life. And Sterling listened, really listened, in a way that powerful men rarely did. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You know what you saved me tonight," he said. "Not just the money, the embarrassment, the damage to my reputation. I've spent 40 years building Meridian Capital, and one forged painting could have unraveled all of it." "I was just doing what I was trained to do," Elena said quietly. "No." His voice was firm. "You were doing what you chose to do. You could have walked away. You chose not to." He stood, and something in his posture had changed. A decision had been made. "I think we need to talk about your future, Miss Vasquez." Sterling moved to the window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline, a kingdom of light and glass and money that stretched in every direction. "Meridian Capital has been expanding into alternative assets for the past 5 years," he said, his back still turned. "Art, wine, real estate, collectibles. It's a $3 billion portfolio, and until tonight, I thought I had the best authentication team money could buy." He turned to face her. "I was wrong. Mr. Sterling, I'm offering you a position," he continued, cutting her off. "Director of Authentication and Provenance Research. You would report directly to me. You would have a team. Build it yourself. Hire whoever you want. Your job would be to ensure that what happened tonight never happens again." Elena's breath caught. I'm not qualified to..." "You just identified an Acilio Federico Joni in 45 minutes while pouring water," Sterling said dryly. "I think you're qualified." He named a salary. Elena felt the room tilt slightly. It was more than her mother had made in 3 years of nursing. It was more than her student loans, her mother's medical bills, and the second mortgage combined. It was the kind of number that didn't exist in her world, or hadn't until 45 minutes ago. "That's negotiable," he said, "upward, along with full benefits, including coverage for immediate family members. I believe you mentioned medical bills. Her mother, the treatments, the second mortgage, all of it, erased in a single sentence." "I have conditions," Elena heard herself saying. If I'm going to do this, Sterling raised an eyebrow. Conditions. I want final say on acquisitions. If I flag a piece as problematic, the deal stops. No overrides, no pressure, no, let's just see how it plays out. If I say no, it's no. A long pause. Agreed. And I want to establish a scholarship, the Vasquez Marchetti Fellowship for Art Authentication Studies, named for my father and my thesis advisor. It would provide full funding for students from underrepresented backgrounds to pursue authentication research. Sterling studied her for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had yet heard it. Your father is gone. 4 years. Elena's voice was steady. Heart attack. He never got to see me graduate. Never knew his name would be on something like this. Sterling nodded slowly. The fellowship will be funded in perpetuity. I'll have my foundation draw up the paperwork this week. He paused. And we'll add a research component, full access to our collection for approved scholars. The Vasquez Marchetti Fellows will have resources that most graduate students can only dream of. Elena felt something release in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. For years she had worked in service to her debt, her mother's illness, her own survival. Now, for the first time, she would be working in service to something larger, to truth, to the next generation of scholars who would come after her, who wouldn't have to choose between their calling and their bills. Elena stood. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, she felt the weight begin to lift. Not just the financial weight, though, that was considerable, something deeper. The weight of being unseen, unvalued, invisible. I'll need to give 2 weeks' notice to the hotel, she said. Sterling smiled, a real smile, the first of the evening. I think Patterson will understand. He extended his hand. Elena took it. Welcome to Meridian Capital, Miss Vasquez. Behind them, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights of Manhattan sparkled like a promise finally kept.